What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast, episode 37. Why is it so hard to be a teenage girl? No, that's not it. The episode today, why is it so hard to be a good person? I'm Randy with my buddy Danny.
Recommended that. What's up,
yeah,
Randy?
exactly. We were looking up what people search for, and it turns out the only two things harder than being a good person are being a girl or being a teenager. And so we figured we could do an episode on being a teenage girl, but I don't have any firsthand experience.
I don't either, unfortunately. Although, in hindsight, I can imagine why those questions come up the most. It's probably hard.
Those are tough times.
yeah,
tough
they
times.
are. They suck.
I mean, just the number of outfits you have to have as a girl is overwhelming. So
the social pressures, everything. Oh my God.
We didn't even get through the intro without getting off topic today.
Nope, we didn't.
So welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a return listener, welcome back again. It's great to have you. And this is exciting. We're talking today about why is it so hard to be a good person? Well, let me ask you, do you think it's hard? And why did you want to do this episode?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot.
Are you trying to be a good person?
Usually.
Goody two shoes.
Right? Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking about this a lot, and I mean, obviously I teach a lot of ethics, so I feel like I should think about this more than I do. And but I've been thinking a lot in the past year more about really living up to the values and stuff that we believe in. And looking back to these philosophers that talk about this, and when you really look at how hard they make it seem to be. And I've just been thinking about that in practice. Why is it so hard? Because it is hard. When you really look at it, it is difficult. It's easy to say a good person is X, Y, or Z, or these character traits or whatever. It's another thing entirely to put that in practice, or to actually live up to that, to actually hold yourself responsible, to actually carefully think through what you're doing and be intentional all the time is not easy. So I think there's a billion, I think there's just an infinite number of potential roadblocks in the way, right? To being a good person. I just thought, I think most of us are trying to be good, right? Or at least think we're good. And
I read, I forget which book it was in, one of those classics in self-development, but they were saying that even Two Gun Crowley or someone like that, he thought that he was a good person. He's like, why is everybody out to get me? And he's like a mafia boss killing a bunch of people. But everybody, I think we all think that we're the good guy and other people are the bad guy. But also there's that wanting to be better. And that's a never ending.
And I think too, if you really want to be better, right, it is never ending. You're constantly working on yourself. And most people probably fall in a sort of middle area, right? They're probably they're not doing anything wildly evil or bad or terrible, but they're not also, because the hard thing too, I think that people forget is being a good person is consistency over time. It's doing the right thing, not just once. Like Aristotle said in the Nicomachean Ethics, he said, one sparrow doesn't make a spring. And what he meant was, if I happen to do something good today, that doesn't make me virtuous. That doesn't make me a good person, right? It's that I do it consistently all the time and that's reflected in my character. That's what makes me a good person, is actually embodying the virtue, not just thinking about it, believing in it, but actually doing it. And that requires, it requires a lot of rational reflection, careful thought, and also just experiential knowledge. I think that a lot of us, if we aren't consciously aware of it and aren't consciously working on it, we don't really realize how hard it can be.
Yeah, especially with all the distractions nowadays. I mean, most people just spend their whole life on social media. So if that was a definition of being a good person, then everybody would be a good person, simple as can be. I think part of it is that being a good person is difficult and not all of it is addictive. For instance, okay, if being a good person was as easy as eating junk food or binge watching on Netflix or, spending tons of time stalking your ex on social media, if it was addictive like that, everybody would be a good person. But being a good person isn't that. It's oftentimes doing the difficult thing, the thing that is the right answer, even though it's hard. And so therein lies the difficulty.
And that's just it, right? Oh, go ahead.
And also the
You seem
reward
excited.
for what you're doing, if there yeah, the reward for what you're doing, if you're going to get a reward, oftentimes is way in the future, not right now, where all those addictive things tend to start dropping all their dopamine bombs.
Well, that's just it, right? Like it's kind of interesting that it is so hard because like, you know, pleasure and pain are like almost like, primordial
Opposites.
sort of like motivations, right? The things that kind of originally got us to do something, you burn your hand, don't do that again, or whatever. And it's funny how, like, to be a good person, it's so hard. It's almost like you have to recalibrate and relearn those things. And you're right, a lot of times, the benefit or the good from being a good person is totally personal. And it's really just about your evaluation of yourself. It has no bearing, in the world. A lot of times, and we see over and over again that being actually a bad person will pay off a lot more now. So being a good person is way harder. So if it's so hard, I mean, this is, I think, also part of the question, which is why is it so difficult to be a good person, but also why should you? If it's so hard and if it's, if the payoffs are so far and few between and so less than the alternative, why even be good? See, there's the other side of it.
I think part of why be good is because society wouldn't exist without it. So there's like 9 billion people on the planet, and
Some
we are
absurd number,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, we are good. Like, we could be bombing each other's heads off nonstop, but we're not. For the most part, we get along really good. And I think a lot of that comes from wanting to be good, whether we're guilted into it through certain things like religion or whatever else, or whether we're doing it because we feel that's what we should do. We're good. So we're going to help out the person who needs help. We're going to give to charity. We're going to, help someone learn something that we already know. And because of that, we're able to function better as a society. Because if you look at it the other way, if everybody was trying to be bad, it would be fun for a little bit. But I think we know what happened to those civilizations. They're no longer here.
No, I think that's a good point. I think most people, right, especially within their community, they want to be relatively decent people, right? Because that makes things work better. And because if you're stuck, you'll also get help, in those same situations. So I think that matters. It's interesting, you reminded me too, in like the Republic, uh, Plato says, that they raise the question of whether it's good to be just or just to appear just. Because if you appeared good, right, you get all the benefits of seeming to be a good person, but then you can do all these self-interested things and benefit yourself otherwise. And this raises interesting questions, I think, of like, why do we bother or why should we? Because I don't know if maybe it's just me, but I think most people probably as they get older think about this more or think about the impact of it more, maybe for their own lives.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So like I have this thing going on in my life now where, just for fun, when I'm walking around and there's people asking for money on the street, I like to give them money. I just keep like dollar bills and stuff in my pocket just so I can give them money, because it's just like, it's a dollar. What can I really do with a dollar? But it could potentially help out their life a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's what I used to think earlier, especially when when I was in college, I was very much against it because there was this one guy who was on the corner every day asking for money, and he had like a brand new leather jacket, he had Nike Airs, and he was still asking for money, and I was totally against it. And then there's other people saying, well, maybe some of the people asking for money, they're doing it because of uh, exploitation, like human trafficking, stuff like that. And it's like, it got me to thinking. It's kind of like that question of, should you be just or should you just appear just? And it's kind of that question of, should I give money or shouldn't I give money? Because, I may be giving money to somebody who doesn't need it. I may be giving someone money to someone who's being trafficked humanly, but they're probably not going to admit it to me. So you just need to give it to everybody, and then the ones who need it will get it, because I just rationalize that if they did not need the money, they wouldn't be out there asking for it. So
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. And that gets into the harder question, right? Of the amount of rational thought involved in making these decisions is often very high. And you have to use the information that you have available to make the best decision, right? That's why they say an informed decision. But then the issue is that we don't know everything. So Sometimes you
Hmm.
have to make decisions like that where you're just kind of like, you're kind of hedging your bets essentially, and just
Oh,
making the assumption that they're probably, if they're bothering to do this in the first place, because I don't know anybody in their right mind that would go stand out there all day doing that. I mean, maybe somebody would, I don't know. But it seems like that's a very boring, tedious existence. So I don't
well,
imagine somebody would do that.
okay. So, I do want to get back to your point on justice. So I think that doing the things that appear just and being just eventually will lead to similar outcomes, because
Well,
eventually, so
go
like
ahead.
if you're trying to appear just, I don't exactly know what that would, can we just say appear good? If you're trying to
Yeah,
appear
yeah, yeah.
good
It's fine thing, same
and
thing. Yeah,
being
yeah.
good. Oh, okay, good. I just need to learn vocabulary.
That's all. That's all.
All right.
You just need only fucking words. Come on.
Okay. So like if you're trying to appear good and you're trying to be good. So in order to appear good, I'm going to have to go out and probably give $1 to somebody. Most likely it'll be when I'm on a date with someone, or, when someone else is around to watch, when the boss is there to watch. But I'm going to have to do some of those actions that I would do if I was being good. And so eventually you may not you may not be doing it for the same reason. It may not affect your soul the same way, but you're going to end up doing the same types of things, I would think.
Okay, so now you're getting into like one of the fundamental problems in ethical theory, which is, you know, what makes it right. Because if we're just focused on the outcome, on what happens in the world, yeah, there's no difference. If I donate to a charity because I'm interested in writing it off on my taxes, and you do it because you think it's the right thing to do, there's ostensibly no difference between our actions from the standpoint of goodness, if all I look at is what happens in the world, right? But if I'm worried about my intentions, my motivations, and I think even more to that, and more in line with like even like stoicism stuff, if I'm worried about my character, my development, that matters a lot. My reasons matter a lot, because that will also play a huge role in whether I actually develop those virtues. If I only give somebody, if I only help out others in need when I'm with a girl because I'm trying to impress her, or I'm with the boss and I'm trying to make myself look good, right, and look like a charitable person, I have no reason to do it otherwise. And I'm not really developing the virtue because I'm really doing it for these other ends beyond being good, right? And I think this is what makes being a good person so fucking difficult, is that the end is that itself, right? There is nothing beyond that, and it takes a lot of work.
Well, I think that it's a lot of work, but you also get to choose it. So like this idea of
Yeah.
somebody who just wants to look just, I think they might benefit themselves just as much from doing that, because they're going to get, they may, in our point of view, they may not be as good as a person who's doing good for the reasons of doing good, but most likely for them, they're getting the things that they want from it, and they're becoming a better person because they're able to look like a good person. That's something that's important to them. See, we kind of think we're doing the same thing almost, where we're thinking that, oh, if I actually am good, then I'll be a better person. And it's like,
Oh, no, no. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. So there is absolutely a level of subjectivity to what we mean by it. I mean, I think that the difficulty in being a good person is really whatever values you believe in is adhering to them, right? Realizing them, putting your ideals into practice, not just saying words, right? But actually doing things, taking responsibility for yourself. And so, yeah, I think I'll agree with you in that extent, that I think there's a wide range of what counts as good, depending on, your how you perceive that, because there's a lot of different views out there.
I also think that when people search on Google, why is it hard to be a good person? It's because they did something good and then life shit on them.
Probably, right? Well, this is this is the issue. I think this is what's hard, right? It's like, um, I think it's hard to know. It's hard for us to know how to respond to things, right? How to do things in the world. And if we're trying to be a good person and I'm trying to put my values into practice, what does that even look like? Do I even know what it looks like? I mean, when we talked to Kai, and we had mentioned that example of the milk, right? And all the adjustments he had made in his life just because of dairy. and trying to move away from that, but also considering all the social conventions, norms, and things like that that come into play when you act. The level of, I think, the level of thought involved, and I think that's really part of it, is that to be it, usually how we define a good person, to be a good person is really to be very intentional. It's to be an agent, and it's to be free, right? It's to take full account and responsibility for yourself. Most of us, I think, prefer blaming the world, circumstances, and others for things rather than taking responsibility ourselves. And that's the main reason why it's so difficult to be good, is because being good in at least implies normally taking all of that responsibility onto oneself, especially for the existentialists, and I think definitely for the Stoics as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's hard because it's also unnatural. If being good was totally natural and instinctual, we would all just be good. But a lot of it is not natural. Like when
Is
you get
it?
angry with someone, you have to restrain yourself and not kill them. That's part of being good. Because sometimes the natural progression of anger would be wanting to do violence.
Yeah, it's funny. The more I think about it, the more I feel like we are a stupid design.
Dude, totally. What part?
Let's give them awareness with no fucking information or any rules or nothing. Let's make up all these stupid things, but give you no context, nothing to work. But yeah, it's like, it's insane. I mean, it really is difficult. I think that's what makes it so hard. And then it's like, and then the other flip side of it is knowing what is good. So I mean, like, I guess like if we were, I don't know, because it's the other side. Like, what is a good person? How do we even define it? And what does that look like in the
Well, the
world?
easy answer is it depends.
Yes,
And it's
it
going to be
does.
different for
Absolutely
everyone.
yeah,
That's the easy answer.
that
I
is
don't
the
think that's
easy
the
answer.
answer that it's, it really does. Well, here's the thing. Okay. For instance, in my life, I talk about this all the time, how I went to vet school because that was what I was supposed to do. I was being a good son.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you
And
were.
I was a good son.
It just made you
And
wildly unhappy.
yeah, and I almost got married to a girl that I didn't love because I was being a good son. And I was being good, but it was someone else's idea of good, and it was terrible. And then once I found that out and I started going after my own ideal of good, then life got freaking awesome.
Well, that's a great point, right? Which is, for a lot of people, good is something culturally or situationally defined by external factors like family, church, society. And if it's about conforming to it, like you were trying to conform to a conception of the good son, right? Or the good person, you weren't actually internalizing those ideas. They weren't who you are. And so I think that's the idea though of the responsibility, right? Of being intentional, of doing actions that are motivated by you, not by outside factors. And
So
so
I
in
think
your
it's
case, I
I
think
think it's kind of
you were trying to be
selfish.
good. What?
Being good is
Yeah,
very
yeah,
selfish.
absolutely. I
It
think it
has to
is. I
be
think
selfish. Yeah.
it ought to be selfish. I think
Yeah.
you better care about it. Otherwise, you're conforming to something external to you, and that's going to lead to some life that's miserable or that's not right for you, right? Just like in your case. And I think this is what's so hard, is that for many of us, I think many of us don't make that connection till way later in life. And for a lot of people, that leads to a lot of issues because they've already gotten the job, they've already gotten married, they've already done all these things that they thought would be good. And I think there's this equation between like the good life and the good person and all. So this is the hard thing too, because it's also defining it for ourselves. And I guess that's what I meant was so difficult about it when I raised this question, was it's not only that we have to define what it means, we have to realize those values in the world. We have to be the example, right?
And then if they've made those commitments, they wonder if they should give up. And they might find themselves listening to our episode from last week.
Which was awesome. Yeah, right. Nice.
Yeah,
I
we
like that
solved
play.
that one. Ka-ching!
We did solve that one. That was very
By the way,
organic.
I just before everybody just thinks I'm in front of a construction site, I did just want to mention that this is the Stoa Poikile. That's where the Stoics used to, Zeno of Citium. That's where he used to talk. It's not just some random construction site.
It's
So,
pretty awesome though. I like it.
yeah,
You
I
know what's
want to go
funny?
see it in real life.
It's funny that all those ruins do look like construction sites. Because
Yeah,
you know
right.
the Greeks and Romans used all the stone and cement. So it's like when you get to the foundation, it always looks like that, unless you're like, it's like, and it's funny. It always is funny to me because I remember seeing I was the foundations of this like really famous bathhouse in Rome, and it's your brain has to like switch for a second to start to see it. You know what I mean? And once you know
Mhm.
it, then you see it. But before that, it's like, ah, it's just construction, whatever.
And there's like normal buildings right on top of it, so it always throws you off. I remember the first time I saw the Colosseum, it was just like I was walking down this one street, and then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And I'm like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting it to be like literally right in the middle of everything.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's like dead in the middle of the city. It's weird, isn't it? It's like,
Hmm.
here's this very old thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool. I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, so um, being good is selfish. I actually like that because one of the most selfish things you can do is be generous. It's kind of interesting. It's like what I was talking about earlier, how it helps us evolve as a society and helps us continue to survive as a society, being good. So being generous is actually a very selfish thing because even though you think you're giving away, you're actually getting more. Like that's one of the reasons that I give money because I feel so much better for doing it. And I believe that it helps bring more money in my direction so I can give away more. And but it's like it's a selfish action. It is.
Yeah, well, it's funny. That's one thing I did like about I like both about existentialism and stoicism and really virtue ethics is that the emphasis is on the self. That being a good there is an obvious benefit about being a good person. Whether it's you can live a good life, the satisfaction you get, whether it's knowing and really preparing yourself for later and knowing that you are good and having that value affirmed. But I think another way to also look at it too is just like it's also doing things that you really care about. So it is inherently selfish because if I'm doing something as a good person, if I'm being accountable and responsible, if I'm really being intentional, I care about what I'm doing, right? And I actually am invested in it. And I think that's important as well. So it is selfish. I think it should be selfish because those values and ideals should be internalized in you. They shouldn't be, it shouldn't be something you're trying to conform to or something external because that's really going to lead you down the wrong path.
Hmm. And also nowadays, there's so many opportunities to not be a good person. So, like, I mean, we'll just go on the same example of me giving out dollars to homeless people. There was earlier today, there was a guy who was I see him every single day, and I didn't give him one, and I felt terrible afterwards walking away. And I'm like, what the heck? What is this? I'm a bad person, and it's just I think you have to find like the balance towards being a good. You don't want to be a great person. You don't want to be an Ubermensch. Ubermensch. You want to just be a good person, not be a neutral person or a bad person, but like somewhere between neutral and great is that's the golden
Ideal,
mean.
right? Well,
Yeah.
and it's funny too because I think that, like you said too, the difficulty about it is I think for a lot of people, it's the constant reflection on our actions, constantly thinking about it, keeping it in mind, and it is difficult. I mean, it's hard to know what to do. Like in your example, if you forget to give someone a dollar or don't give them a dollar when you're trying to be charitable, then you're like, oh crap, why did I do this? And it's funny, it's like I think if we're trying to realize our goal of a good person, there is a certain like sort of balance and peace sort of achieved by the individual. I think that is true where because most of us are pushed and pulled so much by desire satisfaction, by pleasure and pain, that we really don't have a good grip on the choices we're making all the time. And I think the goal of being a good person is also having a firm grip on the choices you're making all the time. And this is what makes it so hard too, because I think it's not just becoming a good person, but it's becoming who you are as well, right? It's also becoming you in the sense of like an authentic self or realizing yourself in some important way. And I think that's what also makes it so hard because it's like a lifelong thing. It's not something you just get, right?
Yeah. I think it's really important to look back over time too. To compare your not compare yourself with like Mother Teresa or Gandhi or something like that, or the Buddha, like they were exceptions, but actually compare yourself to yourself a year ago. Like after I felt bad about it, I looked at myself and then I was like, you know what? Compared with who I was in college when I would never give that person money, I give people money nowadays. That's awesome. And so, it's kind of like comparing yourself over time and seeing, am I headed in the direction that I want to go?
Oh yeah, dude, and that's essential because you're seeing actually real progress, right? You have a real metric upon which you can actually measure yourself, which is against yourself. You can't measure yourself against anything else. Plus, Mother
Oh,
Teresa,
but
come on.
but
She
people
was like
love
a
to do that all the time.
yeah,
Dude, I
they do.
mean, that's the thing. Okay, so ever since I heard this from, I think it was Naval Ravikant, it made such a big impact, and I repeat it all the time on here because I think it can make a big impact for everyone. Is that we all the time we cherry pick these things that certain people have, like, oh, I want Elon Musk's money, and I want Brad Pitt's body, and I want this, and I want that, and I want this. Meanwhile, you're not taking everything else that goes along with it. And so Naval Ravikant, on one of his interviews, he was saying that he got to a point where he was getting jealous, but he saw that, like, if he wanted one part of someone, he'd have to be willing to take the whole entire thing. And ever since I heard that, that made such a big difference for me, because I sometimes get green with envy, and I will want something that somebody has, and then I'll be like, hang on, do I really want that whole thing? And then I'll be like, oh, no, not at all. And then it's
Well,
just like, oh, so much easier.
we all do that. And I think part of it too is that, it's so easy to look out in the world and find examples very quickly that isolate one thing we wish we had more of now, whether it's like, Mother Teresa's caring about others or Elon Musk's money or this or that, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but you wish you had it now. And so you look at these examples, and you're like, oh, I want that. You envy it, but you're not thinking about the whole life. You're not thinking about all the other bullshit that comes with it. You're not asking yourself, do I really want all of that? And I think that's the whole difficulty of the good person thing, right? Is that
Uh,
it's, living your life.
yeah, like another example. So I'm reading Be Water, My Friend, the Bruce Lee biography by his daughter. And she was saying that, like, Bruce Lee doesn't want us to be Bruce Lee. He wants us to live up to whoever we could be. But even he wasn't perfect. Like, he couldn't screw in a light bulb. He couldn't cook an egg. She would probably get a kick out of watching him try and assemble something from IKEA. So, like, even though we all idolize this guy because we think he's like the expert martial arts, he's a philosopher, he's got it all figured out. It's a lot of the things that we take for granted, he couldn't do.
It's funny. One of the things I'll never forget, the first time I read was in Nietzsche, when he talks about these examples that we look at from history and this, like, society's tendency to take these examples like Jesus, Mother Teresa, Siddhartha, all these Gandhi, whatever. And he's like, we take these examples and we try to trim their life down to like 10 things so that you could emulate them. But he's like, the problem is that they are an exemplar because they're an individual. They're unique. You can't just break it down to a list of qualities or traits and say, anybody who does this will become that person, because you're never going to be that person. They were a unique individual that existed at a certain time under certain conditions and happened to be able to rise to whatever level, right? And I think that's the other thing about being a good person, is that you are your own unique individual, right? So you have to effectively work with what you have to make that work for you and get the life that you want.
Mm-hmm. And also, we miss out on so much of the details. Like, all the things that we're struggling with now, we want an end result now. Like, any of these people that we idolize, like, you know, any of them, we see them now as what they are now. We don't realize all the struggles that they got to, and they could have been going through the same exact struggle that we're going through right now. They just kept at
Oh
it and
yeah.
got through it, and then they got to where they are. And really, anybody who's done anything significant in their life has had to overcome some serious obstacles in order to get there. So this, the difficulty to be a good person, it's worth going through, because
I
eventually you
think
get to hang out on some steps like that.
no doubt. Right? I think it is too. And I think it is worth it. And it's funny because, it's like, we can ask the question of like, what else are we here for? And I mean, I think at the very least, we're here to live our own lives, right? Whatever that means. And I think part of doing that is, you know, being who we want to be and being who we think we should be. And I think that means embodying our ideals, embodying our values, trying to live up to our own notion of what that means. And it's a difficult task. but it's, that seems one of the things that will give our lives reason and purpose and value in a way that other things simply won't, right? Like where everything else you lose, or it's something that might be, partially conditioned by factors outside your control or whatever. This is something totally that you possess the power to do, regardless of, anything else. And I think that's what makes it so valuable, but also so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. It also, because it is hard, it gives it more value. Like we look at these pleasures that gives us instantaneous pleasure. They're here immediately, but they're also gone immediately. And also we become tolerant of them. But like doing the hard things to be a good person, the pleasures aren't here immediately, but when we do start getting them, it's kind of like the long burn type of pleasure. Like we
Yeah.
feel it for a long time and it's a lot stronger. And yeah.
And we're equipped, right? I think there is something to the idea too that, I think a lot of the virtue ethicists talk about it, but the idea that we're more equipped to deal with challenges in life when we work on ourselves in this way, because we know ourselves more clearly, we're more balanced, we are more reflective, and so therefore we're more prepared to deal with whatever the world throws at us, right? So part of being a good person is also being able to live in the world well. I think that's an important connection to make, that that emphasis on personal development and growth is, there is also that selfishness side to it of, if I work on this stuff, I'm going to do better in the world because I'm more equipped to deal with anything thrown at me, right?
Yeah. I while you were saying that, I was off daydreaming a little bit. And
That's fine. We're all allowed to work to do that.
and so I was thinking about, like I always wonder, like what if everybody else is just a figment of our imagination, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like if that were the case, and who knows if it is, but what would be the benefit of being a good person? Because really you could be whatever you want to be. But it's kind of like the generative idea, the creation that is what we are, where if we're good, I kind of look at it like Kali, the god of destruction, and then I don't know what the god of bringing things undestruction.
Whatever. Yeah.
Um, but like one creates, one destroys. So even though they both have to exist, if you want the world to be better, and even if you're the only one and everyone else is a figment of your imagination, if you want your world to be better, then you have to be a good person.
Well, wasn't it
Right.
Gandhi that said we have to be the change we want to see in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And I know, I think that's a
Exactly.
good point, right? Even if everybody else is a figment of our imagination, right? It's still, if it's within our individual power to make things better, to change things, right? To improve the situation. And that starts with us, no matter what the external factors are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it requires us.
So why is it worthwhile? Because sometimes it sucks. Oh,
Oh God, yeah,
oh,
it does, right? So why is being a good person worthwhile? I think, oh
yeah.
man, I think it's worthwhile. I think because one, I think, every one of us ultimately wants to develop ourselves to be better, right? To become better. And I think, again, however you define it, I think it's worthwhile because I think it is something that gives our life a meaning and a purpose that's directly stems from us. It doesn't rely on anything else. And I think that's important. And it makes us better equipped to deal with things in the world, to deal with ourselves and our lives and our bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also like whenever something's really difficult that I'm going through, but I know it's good or the right thing to do, I always imagine myself on my deathbed, and I imagine myself being like, yeah, that was hard, but I did it. And I freaking did it. I didn't give up. And I think that's definitely helpful because it gives you that, like, I lived for a purpose. Like I did something worthwhile. And that's a good feeling to have, because the other option would be like, oh, I kind of cowered, broke under the pressure of that one. Oh, that wasn't too good.
I think that's part of it, right? Too, is that idea of, what are we living for, and looking back on our lives, reflecting on it, what are we really going to miss the most? What are we really going to regret the most? And I think for most of us, we're going to regret not doing those things to become the best person we could become, ultimately, however we define that. And I also think the other side of it too is that if you embody the ideals and values that you have, you actually you actually do believe in something. If you just say things and don't do it and put it in practice, you really don't believe in anything. You just have ideas that you might know. You don't
Yeah,
really
yeah,
embody them, you don't show them, right? Part
definitely.
of yeah, part of that is actually putting in practice. It's not just saying shit or believing shit.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a saying like what you just said, that to know and not to do is not yet to know, where there's the
Exactly. Yeah.
experiential knowledge of doing it. But another thing, so I can hear these young kids out there. I hear them because I talk with them often, and they're all about money and Lambos and bling bling and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, but I want this anyways. I don't care about being good because I want this. And here's the thing, I say go for it. I say you have to go for it and find how unfulfilling it is. You have to get everything you want. Get the Lambo, get the sweet yacht, get all the bills, get all the honeys, get all the watches, whatever you want, and then realize how alone and depressed you are.
It's a good point. I think it's a great point.
I think you
Not to
have to
mention,
do it.
and,
Otherwise, you'll regret never going for it. You
and
know?
I also think too, those things don't have to necessarily be mutually exclusive either. I think it is absolutely possible to both be a good person and also pursue things like that. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I mean, I think this has to be said carefully and done in the right way, because oftentimes I think people think of that and they think the quickest way there, which often involves not being a good person. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think I
Yeah,
think,
you can have both.
and it's funny too. I think thinking about this again, why I was thinking about this topic too is like, just in our day to day too, when you think about it, like all the times, like you think about your reactions as being too strong. Like, why did I get mad in that situation? Or, you get mad at yourself because you made a stupid decision. Or, you get mad at yourself because you let yourself get distracted for fucking like 2 hours and didn't do work that you wanted to complete. Or you get mad at yourself because you're not doing what you want to do, or you're not living the life you want to live. All of those times, I think, are indications of why it's so important to try and be good, and why it's so important to try and develop ourselves, because in the end it seems like it's the only thing that really matters, that when we do that, those other problems fade away because we know why we did it, we know the reasons, but we also know that these things are hard. We're going to get angry sometimes, we're going to have issues in relationships, it happens, and trying to work through that and be healthy is not easy. I think all of us struggle with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of the emotional guidance system, they call it. Like some of that anger and those feelings are necessary because it helps direct you. Like I know in my
Yeah.
life, my experiencing depression oftentimes helps direct me, because I know if
Oh yeah.
I'm getting depressed, I'm doing the wrong stuff. You know.
Yeah, dude, if I'm in a serious existential despair and crisis, I know I'm probably doing the wrong thing. I should probably shift a little bit.
But you know what I noticed recently? It seems like whenever I am absolutely not in existential despair, I'm very, very busy. So I think
Well,
part for me, it's partly being busy.
no, I don't. I think that's true for a lot of people, but I think, with a caveat that like busy doing the right things though, because you could just be busy slash distracted. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right thing, living the right life, or whatever.
True.
But I think in your case, knowing you as I do, I think you're busy in the right way. You're busy working on things that you want to work on that are important to you. You're
Mhm.
developing skills, you're growing. I think
Yeah.
that kind of busyness is really healthy, right? Because and it's good to be busy. It is. We talked about this before, right? Like when we're busy, we often feel best because we're making those small accomplishments, making those small gains, but we're also busy doing things that we want to do and that we value. And I think that's important, because
Ooh,
just
and
being busy sucks.
I like what you said with those small gains, because that is something that's so critically overlooked. Everybody wants that one thing, that like one action is going to get them there to do it. But it's not just this one thing, it's like a bunch of teeny little daily actions that you take. You're like adjusting a teeny bit, teeny bit, teeny bit, teeny bit, and then eventually you get to where you want to be. But it's that constant repetitive compound interest type thing.
No, that's a great point. I think that's what's so hard about being the good person too, right? Is it's not this quick jump to, yeah, I'm good now. It's these small, little, incremental
Oh, you mean I
adjustments
can't just
over
watch
time.
like a 15-minute YouTube video and then be good, or I can't buy this course and then just be good? It
I
doesn't
know,
doesn't
right?
work that way.
Wish it worked that way. And it's
Yeah.
these small gains over time, like everything else, which makes it so fucking difficult. And I think that's part of the other problem is that it's, it's so hard to stay consistent over time. And it's so easy just to do something else that you just, we just fail at it constantly.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, so okay, so let's talk about this since we brought it up because it is these daily things that you need to do, and it's hard to stick at it. So we've done episodes before where we've talked about how to do that, but like just some things that would be helpful to help people stay with these things. Like for instance, that's why I keep, $1 bills in my back pocket because I know that it's selfish, but giving money, it helps me feel good, but it also helps other people out. And I think I'm being a good person by doing that. And so like it's by having these small, simple habits. Whereas if I didn't put that money in my pocket, then I'd have to go digging around in my wallet and bring out some money, and then it would be more difficult. So it's like making them easy enough to where we can do them, deciding what we want to do, and then making them easy enough to where we can do them without conscious thought.
I like that too, because you're saying, you're establishing a value, you're sticking to it, you're making it easy, you're making it consistent. So you do it over time consistently. It's not a problem. And then you're more likely to do it in almost any situation, right? Because you've already established that sort of baseline of that I do this. And I think the other thing to keep in mind too, and I think we already mentioned this a little bit, but I think for a lot of people, I think it's important to remember that being good is difficult. It's incremental growth over time. And sometimes, in that process, it requires a lot of reflection. And I think, don't expect more than what you're going to get on a day to day. I think that's important to sort of like temper your expectations a bit and focus more on the problem, right? If your main problem, like at least for myself, when I'm trying to work on myself, I try and pick immediate things that I find that I want to correct now and try and work on aspects of myself, because I think it's a good way to sort of, if I feel like I get too angry in certain situations, or I feel like I'm treating someone unfairly, that's something I need to step back and reflect on, think about, and then try to put into practice. And a lot of times I think it just means giving yourself time to think before you act so you can act intentionally rather than simply reacting to a situation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. Hmm.
I think also
Yeah.
too is just trying to define what a good person is for you, which is hard. Writing it down. We said this a million times, but trying to get sort of an idea of what it means. What does a good life look like? What does a good person look like? And going from there. And just trying to work on yourself daily. It's not an easy task though.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's like the understatement of the year is having a vision of what you want. That's like, I would say that's like probably the most important thing you could do.
Well,
Because,
and what's funny about it too? Sorry. What's funny about it is that we usually, so many people have a vision of what they want with work or with finances, but not with respect to their character or who they want to be. And I think we often overlook that one, but it's even more important than any of the others, because the others fall apart if we don't have that character established. If we don't know who we are, those will fall apart anyway.
isn't it funny? We're so busy trying to give off this, we're so busy trying to give off this persona on social media or whatever, that we want other people to think that we're some way, that we don't actually care about what our actual character is. Like you remember back in the day, like those westerns where someone will call someone a liar, and then it would be like, "Them be fighting words." We're gonna do it.
Yeah,
Like
literally shoot
back,
each other over it.
yeah, back then, one of them would die because they
Yeah,
insulted
yeah.
the character.
And that
Nowadays,
solves
it's
the
just like,
problem.
yeah, nowadays it's just like, I hope I got a bunch of likes. Ah,
Yeah. No, it is true though. I mean, but it's like it's become something that you can manipulate digitally rather than actually do. And I think that's part of the problem. And that's what made it so difficult. It's so easy to take fucking pictures and to present yourself a certain way and blah, 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 that you forget that you actually have to do it. And you're not even doing anything by doing that. You're creating a
mm,
narrative, but you're not living that narrative. You're not
mm,
actually being that person. And unless those two sort of come together, you're really doing nothing.
Yeah. So that was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Why
You
is
were
it
good.
so hard to be a good person and a teenage girl? A
It is,
teenager or a
isn't it?
girl? Yeah.
Yeah. All three are
Uh,
hard. I've always found them
uh,
difficult. It's like, God, man, the difficulties involved in life.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a bitch.
Yeah. But it makes it my grandmother, I always used to ask her, I was like, whenever I would have difficulties, I always would be like, why is it so hard? And she would always say, because it makes life interesting.
But, you know, it's funny, but it's those old proverbial type things are true, right? Because it does make it interesting. It also makes it more valuable. If it was super easy, we wouldn't value it. Just like, I mean, like if it required you nothing to get something, that thing has no value to you because it requires zero to get it. So it doesn't matter. When things are hard, they do matter more. But I also think when they're hard to get, especially in terms of like character building, they're also hard to lose. And I think that's important to remind ourselves too, that it might be very difficult to get, but once we get it, it is also very hard to lose. And I think that's important.
Boom, dude, you're just nailing them today. That's another really, really, really great point.
Thank
Like,
you.
yeah, I've heard that about like weightlifting and stuff like that. Like people who work on their muscles every day, it's a lot harder to lose than someone who will just go at it for a month and then stop. It's yeah, and it's character's the same way. Character's just a big muscle.
It is. Yeah, I mean, basically, right? Everything is. It's a good way to look at it.
Yep. Cool. Well, any
Awesome.
any final tidbits? I think you've given some good recommendations today in terms of
I mean, I think I'll end with the same as, I think I did the other day. It was just like, take your time, think about it, and just keep thinking. I think that's the important thing is that we stay aware and stay reflective in terms of working on ourselves, because then we're aware of what we're doing and we're not taking ourselves down the wrong path stubbornly, but making conscious choices and adjustments as necessary. I think that's the most important thing.
yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And I would just say, just stick with it. Like, here's
Yeah.
the I have this visualization. It's probably completely wrong, but I have this visualization of a stoic, and he's just standing there against the elements, like the rain's pouring down on him, the wind, the sun corroding, everything is just like completely getting worn away, but he's just standing there. And then at the end, he's like still there, totally defined, full of character, and everything just washed over him because he just stood there. He just stood with it.
I like that though. It's like sticking with yourself, right? Being yourself in the face of all of that, and then you'll still be yourself afterwards, and you're fine, right? There's nothing to
Exactly.
lose because you haven't lost yourself. I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us for it was episode 37 today.
Yeah, man.
Episode 37 of the
Damn.
Existential Stoic podcast. Like, let's say you have 37 hours of nothing to do. You could download every single long episode that we have and you could listen to them. Or if you're going on a journey in a car and you just want some companionship with me and Danny, you could just download all of the episodes, listen to them. You could share them with your friends, your family. You could watch them on YouTube. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, join us on YouTube or listen on podcasts. And yeah, it's been a great hanging, Danny. I'll
Always a
see you
pleasure,
later.
Andy. Later.
Peace.